Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Melissa Palmer. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be both your moderator and your presenter today for this special event on revisiting 321 and other backup backup wisdom. So before we get started today, just a couple of different housekeeping rules I wanted to cover with everybody. So first off, we want this to be an informative event for you. So we encourage any questions in the question box in the webinar control panel. I'm going to be answering your questions live during the event. So just keep them coming, any questions you have for me. And we'll also have some dedicated Q&A time at the end in case I don't get to everything. Now, the Q&A panel is also a great place just to say hello, which a lot of people have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. I'm located in New Jersey. It's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event where you have any technical issues. Now, a simple browser refresh will probably fix anything you're facing, but if that doesn't work for you, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll be happy to help you out. At the end of this webinar event, we're also going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance to win during the live event, and the official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. So scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series webinars are a partnership and they wouldn't be brought to you without our wonderful sponsors. So they make it possible for this great content. And over the couple of the next few slides, I just want to tell you a little bit about the sponsors that we have with us today, which are actually going to make a lot of sense for the topics that we're covering. So first up, we are supported by Rubrik. Rubrik is a cybersecurity company, and their mission is to secure the world's data. They pioneered zero trust data security to help organizations achieve business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud is powered by machine learning, delivers data protection and cyber resilience in a single platform across enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. Their platform also automates policy management of data and enforcement of data security through the entire data lifecycle. They help organizations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability, continuously monitor for data risks and threats, and restore business with their data when infrastructure is attacked. You can learn more at rubrik.com/ransomware. Today's session is also sponsored by Kasten by Veeam. Kasten offers the #1 solution in Kubernetes data protection. With Kasten, you can ransom-proof your applications, scale your infrastructure efficiently, and leverage cloud-native integrations. Purpose-built for Kubernetes, the Kasten K12 data management platform provides enterprise operation teams an easy-to-use, scalable, and secure system for backup restore, disaster recovery, and application mobility of Kubernetes apps. Check out K10 for free at kasten.io/free-Kubernetes. We also have Clumio supporting us in this wonderful event today. Clumio handles automated backup and recovery for your AWS data. Find out why half of Clumio customers switch from AWS backup and 100% of them never go back. Follow the link in your handout section to download a For Dummies book about backing up Amazon S3, which is an important thing to do, which we're going to talk about in a second because I have a little poll for you today. Now, I want to know what cloud you're using for your production applications. And I'm asking this for a specific reason. I spent a lot of time in the backup and recovery space. And guess what? A lot of people kind of forget to protect their cloud data. So I just want to know, what are you using for production, right? Are you using AWS, Azure, GCP, a different cloud? And if you're using a different cloud, let me know in the comments. Multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, or if you're not in the cloud at all, which some people are not. It's totally up to you and your business requirements. I see a lot with the big three, of course, AWS, Azure, GCP, and all that good stuff. Not uncommon. So let's get going and talk a little bit more about revisiting the 3-2-1 backup rule and other backup wisdom. My name is Melissa Palmer. You might know me as Veemis. I have a blog at veemis.net and Veemis33 on Twitter. My experience is very heavy in VMware. I'm a VMware certified design expert, but I also have a long history with storage and backup vendors. I was SE Solutions Architect, Office of the CTO for storage companies and backup companies for a number of years. And I've done a lot of focus on disaster recovery and ransomware recovery in my focus, in my career, which is why I actually really like to talk about the 3-2-1 backup rule quite a bit. It's one of those things that everybody's kind of heard about and says, but we're going to dissect it a little bit and talk about how we can kind of up level it for the year 2023 and protecting our data, especially in the cloud, right? So today we're going to talk about the 3-2-1 rule. We're going to talk about why we back up. We're going to talk about what's changed since the 3-2-1 rule came into play. And we're going to talk about some new strategies for backing up our data to make sure that we're keeping up with modern threats. And I think you know what modern threat I'm probably going to talk about. So the 3-2-1 backup rule is actually pretty simple. 3 copies of your data. So that's your production copy and 2 other copies. 2 different media/storage devices. And 1 of those copies should be off-site. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the 3-2-1 backup rule. It's a good guideline, 3 copies of data, right? In case we lose 1 or 2, we still have a third, 2 different media storage devices. Now this one is kind of interesting because way back in the day, why they were telling you to pick different media types was almost because, okay, so what if you are using a certain storage array and your second storage array is the same storage array and there's some, oh, Jeffrey, you're skipping ahead with the 3-2-1-0 rule. We're gonna add on to this in a little bit. But the 0, I'm gonna give you a spoiler. The 0 is we don't want to have any errors during actually testing our backups or testing that our backups, our data can recover or is restored properly. But a lot of that 2 different media types was like old, like we don't want bad firmware or anything. And that comes into play a little bit today, why we would want 2 different media types. And a lot of times it comes down to performance and cost, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You're not a buzzkill, Jeffrey. Thank you for your comments. And everybody, please keep your comments and questions coming during the presentation. But before we go too far into this, I have a question for all of you. Let's take a pause, right? Get into our time machine a little bit. And why do we back up? Now, I almost did a really funny poll here, but today I'm going to tell you a little story from much earlier in my career. I was a systems engineer for a storage company, and I was brand new to working with storage. And I had a customer that said, our backups need to finish in 8 hours. And it was a ton of data, right? So I went to an engineer who specialized in data protection. I'm like, hey, my backups need to finish in 8 hours. Can you help me design a system? I don't think I have it quite right. And he said to me, okay, Melissa, but how long do they have to recover? And I'm like, what do you mean? How long do they have to recover? They didn't say anything about recovering the data. They just told me that, hey, we have to back it up in 8 hours. And that's kind of missing the whole point of backup. I remember being on call when I was a VMware administrator and getting paged because VMs missed their backups. And even back then I took it, and this was actually my first job after graduating from college. I was like, oh no, the backup didn't finish. That's a bad thing. But I never went that extra step. And a lot of people don't when we're planning backups. The whole reason we are backing anything up is so that we can recover later, right? If we can't recover, we are in trouble. And things have kind of changed a lot in recent years, especially about threats, right? Okay, so why would I need to recover a machine? Well, maybe it's a data loss event. Maybe somebody messed something up. Maybe someone deleted something. That was like a lot of the reasons people would recover in the past. But now ransomware is a very real threat, probably more of a real threat than a data center outage in some cases. So we need to be ready to recover. And unless we go into talking to the 3-2-1 backup rule and planning our backup environments without recovery in mind, it's kind of short-sighted and we're not going to be successful come disaster day when we do need to recover. So what has changed since this 3-2-1 rule? And this kind of ties back to why I asked that question at the beginning of the presentation. What has changed? The cloud has changed, right? Even in my career, which has probably been longer than it looks, the cloud wasn't a big thing when I was first getting started. VMware was starting to pick up, right? I have a heavy VMware background, but no one talked about the cloud because it didn't exist. And the cloud has fundamentally changed a lot of the way we do things. A lot of cloud stuff, AWS was kind of the cloud leader for a long time. It was the first one that a lot of people were starting to consume. And one thing that AWS has is storage, right? They have Amazon S3 storage, which is actually a storage standard that has been adopted by a lot of other companies. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the cloud, right? People sell S3 compatible object storage devices. Vendors sell those, right? So you might be going to a device in your data center, or you very well may be backing up your data to the cloud these days. And that's something that has fundamentally changed since the 3-2-1 rule kind of came out. And this S3 compatible storage has a lot of different qualities with it and can have a lot of different qualities with it based on your requirements, right? So object storage can be extremely cost effective. It's also easy to get and put in multiple locations. You can get it through a reseller partner. You can consume it directly from the cloud. And the good part about object storage is there's multiple performance options, right? Whether we're talking cloud on-prem, S3 compatible, there's still some kind of disks underneath. So you might have a ultra-fast object storage array on site to recover very fast from. And you might be using object storage in the cloud to store longer-term retention backups. But S3 storage has kind of changed the game for one main reason, and that's immutability. S3 storage kind of brought immutability to light with the object lock property, which means something very simple, right? Immutability just means that the data cannot be modified or deleted until the retention period has expired, right? So if I write a bunch of data and I say it's immutable for 30 days, can't get rid of that data for 30 days. I can't delete it. I can't modify it. I can't do anything, which means if a threat actor is in my environment, they can't delete it and they can't modify it, which means they can't encrypt your backups, right? So if we get ransomware because we have bad people in our environment, our backups are still safe if they're immutable. So we're going to talk more about the 3-2-1 backup rule, but you need at least one immutable copy of your data these days, at least one. If you can have an immutable copy at every stage and every location, that's even better. But there's got to be at least one immutable copy that we know we're not going to lose in today's climate. So before we talk about the 3-2-1 backup rule again, we need to protect our data, right? But unless we know how we're going to recover it, we can't protect it. So just kind of this blanket notion of, okay, 3 copies of our data, 2 different media, 1 offsite. That's great. And that's a good baseline. But we need to talk about what else we need to do. And why do we need to do that? I've said this a lot, because of ransomware, right? It's not a matter of if you're going to have a ransomware attack. It's probably when someone's going to get in and do something. And we want to be able to recover from backup. And we want to do that fast, right? So let's talk a little bit about recovery planning. And we're going to spend a lot of time here. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay. So before we protect our data, we need to plan for recovery. We need to know what are our recovery objectives. Those are commonly known as the RPO and the RTO, right? So the RPO is the recovery point objective, the point in time I'm going to recover to. And the RTO is the recovery time objective. How long does it take me to recover? And these recovery objectives are going to guide all of our data protection decisions that we make through the course of our disaster recovery planning. So let me give you a couple of examples, right? I have an application that is extra important. It is the most important app I have. It can't be down for more than 30 minutes because our company will lose a ton of money. And a lot of times there's 2 drivers for your recovery objectives. It's going to be money. Your company's not going to make money, or it's going to be human life, right? We've seen a lot of ransomware attackers kind of going after healthcare organizations and hospitals because they're more likely to pay because human life is on the line. It's not a very nice tactic, but it happens a lot. So those are often the 2 different drivers. So if I have an RPO of 30 minutes and an RTO of 30 minutes, that means I have to have this application back online in 30 minutes, and I can't lose more than 30 minutes of data. Now, this might not even be a backup, quite honestly. I might not even be using backups per se. I could be using replication technologies. I might just be replicating a virtual machine, for example, from one site to a secondary site, or which can also be in the cloud, right? So I might be going from on-prem into the cloud so that if something happens, I can flip the switch in the cloud and immediately start up my application and I'm good to go. We're still backing up our data, of course, because we need copies, but that's more replication. And that comes with a cost, right? And the cost is much higher on-prem. If we're looking at the traditional two-site disaster recovery model, well, if I have a tier 1 application, I need the same capacity in my production site as I do in my disaster recovery site because I'm replicating my data. Those VMs exist in site A, and in site B, I have to have a mirror of that environment to turn them on. That can get really expensive, and that could also change the application classification. You might say, okay, I have a 30-minute RTO because this application produces so much revenue, but we've done the math, and this disaster recovery solution is so expensive to implement that it might be smarter for us just to take an outage than to put the money in up front to fix it and remediate the problems. And that's the thinking that's gotten a lot of people in trouble when it comes to ransomware, right? Because the event of a data center outage or a hardware outage or all that kind of stuff can really be problematic. I have a great question from someone saying, how is immutability implemented in the cloud? Usually this is specific to very expensive devices on-prem. Not necessarily, depending on what cloud you're using. If we just talk about GCP, Azure, or AWS, they all have immutable storage options for you, right? So if I went to an AWS, it's S3. I know Azure Blob has immutability. I can't remember what Google calls their storage off the top of my head. So basically, you would just go to AWS, get an S3 storage bucket, and configure immutability on it. So it's not something that usually you have an extra charge for or anything. You're just going to consume the storage. But when you configure it with your data protection system, you're going to make sure it's configured in a way where you're writing to the immutable data store. And most times there's configuration required in the cloud and a little bit of configuration required in your data protection system as place. And yes, there are a lot of really expensive on-prem devices, but there's also a lot of really inexpensive on-prem devices too. Again, just term based on what your recovery requirements are. If you are talking about one of these critical applications and you are following that kind of two-site model, you might want to keep like a week's worth of backups or something like that on a very, very fast piece of storage because, there's all this data out there. I can't cite it off the top of my head that says when someone has a recovery event, they are usually recovering data from the last 7 days. And chances are with ransomware, that is the case as well. Okay, we have another great question. What are your thoughts on data at rest encryption? Doesn't it introduce additional workload to the backup requirement? So I actually love data at rest encryption because there's a saying, if you don't encrypt your data, someone else will do it for you, right? In the case of ransomware and all that good stuff. Can it introduce additional overhead into your environment? Of course it can, right? But that's something that can easily be solved by your backup vendor and sizing your environment. Again, this is going to kind of tie back to that RPO and RTO and the dollar and cents behind things, but the backup vendor you select will be able to build that into the system in such a way that, yes, it's more load, but we're going to size to that. We're going to architect the solution properly and it won't have a problem with it. If you suddenly turn on data at rest encryption in a backup environment that has never used it before and wasn't sized properly for it, yes, you could see performance issues. So there might need to be some changes that are made. I am a fan of encryption pretty much in many cases, especially sensitive data, right? So you don't have to, I don't want to say you don't have to encrypt everything, but it's not often realistic to encrypt everything. So some people might choose only to encrypt sensitive data, which is, again, better than doing nothing. And I've seen environments that have 100% encryption as well. It really depends on what your data is, what your business is, and what your risk tolerance is. So back to a little bit about our RPO and RTO. So that 30-minute example is going to be some kind of replication. If we're talking about maybe like a dev test type of environment where, okay, our RPO and RTO are like 8 hours, or our RPO is 8 hours, but our RTO is like 2 days, that's definitely backups. And that's not backups that need to be ultra fast or anything like that. You don't need high-speed disks. You don't need anything. You should pretty much be okay with almost any standard backup product, configuration, backup repository, whatever the vendor calls it, out there. Now, here's where things can break. Just something I've noticed from working with really large environments. A lot of people don't test for a real world scenario where we're recovering everything from nothing, right? So that's something that, okay, I might be able to recover application B and application C, no problem, but can I recover them at the same time? So a lot of people will do their disaster recovery or backup testing in a staggered fashion. And sometimes that could be problematic come disaster day when everything breaks at once. So we need to know those RPOs and RTOs. If we don't have them, we need to work with our organization to get them, right? We're going to need to talk to application owners who are probably going to need to talk to business owners, and we're all going to get together and we're going to need to decide what the RPO and RTO is for each and every application. This process in general is called a business impact analysis, right? Because we need to analyze the impact of the business of all of these applications going offline, being encrypted, et cetera, et cetera. And this is really what's going to guide how we recover and where we store our backups, because we can't properly architect the backup solution until we have these figured out. Now, like I said, the cloud can be used as like almost a giant cheat code for any of this stuff, provided I have enough bandwidth between my site and the cloud. If I'm cloud native, that's great. I'm already there, but I do still need to protect data in the cloud too. So in the case of AWS, I might have a backup in a different region than I have my production environment. So if that region goes down, I can still recover my applications and run. Remember, the cloud is just someone else's data center, basically, right? So all the problems that we've had on-prem and all that kind of good stuff still carries on to the cloud. So we need to start with recovery planning before we can even talk about how we're going to back things up, which brings me to my next point about recovery planning is knowing where you will recover. Now, I have a lot of really weird stories from working in the data protection field for as long as I did. And one was when I was going to try to talk to a customer about a ransomware protection solution. And they actually stopped my presentation and told me that, well, ransomware is a cyber event. And for a cyber event, we recover in place. So we don't need a backup. We don't need everything. We just need to recover in place. We don't need an extra environment. We don't need to store an extra copy, like all these weird things. And I was like, that's nice. But what happens when you call the FBI after you've been ransomwared and they say, well, we're quarantining your environment for an investigation. And then you can't recover in place, right? So the other important thing is to know, where are you going to recover? Are you going to stick with that secondary data center model? Are you going to maybe use a co-location facility so you don't have to own a second data center, or maybe you're all colo at this point? Are you going to go to the public cloud? Are you going to go to a service provider cloud? These are all decisions we need to make before we can properly protect our data. Now, just throwing in a plug for our sponsors, pretty much no matter which way you go with this, one of our sponsors has a solution that can help you. So I really encourage you to take a look at those handouts when you have a chance. But again, there's all this planning that needs to be done up front so we can recover properly later. And unless we're doing that, we're kind of missing the boat and we won't be able to recover. Couple more examples I have off the top of my head. I have seen a lot of people starting to go to a public cloud as their secondary site and getting out of the secondary data center, getting out of the co-location facility, getting out all of that. And there's this big notion now of like just-in-time recovery, where yes, I have all my data in the cloud, but I don't necessarily have an environment built to recover to. I'm going to restore those VMs and convert them to cloud native formats, or I'm going to spin up another environment automatically and all that kind of good stuff to kind of get everything going. But it's different for every business, every organization. If you don't have a cloud component to your disaster recovery solution today, I really do encourage you to take a look at it, because there's lots of cool things you can do when you go directly to the cloud, and you can actually get really low RPOs and RTOs and save an incredible amount of money if we're comparing things to secondary data center or co-location facilities, or even a service provider cloud, right? It kind of depends what you need to do. Any other questions so far about kind of recovery and all that kind of good stuff? Okay, so we know our business objectives, our recovery objectives. We know our RPOs and RTOs. We know where we're going to recover to. And this might be a couple of facilities to hedge our bets. Remember, we want to have 3 copies of our data with 1 offsite. we'll talk about the 3-2-1 rule again, but I would probably want more than one off-site in today's climate in case my whole environment is compromised. Because a lot of times people would say that second data center is off-site, but if there's some kind of connectivity or shared resources between the two data centers, if a malicious actor gets into one, chances are they'll get to another. So that's something to consider. Same thing with a co-location facility, right? If you're in a colo facility, like I've seen weird things where people do DR and one rack is over here and the other rack is over there, but they're in the same facility and they're counting that as off-site and DR. And I don't necessarily buy that. I've seen people do stuff across the street from each other, right? They're saying that's two sites, which technically it is. However, if we're talking about more of a classic disaster of some kind of fire, floods, all that kind of stuff, not so much. Another great question on case management for tracking and remediating backup failures. So that's something that definitely needs to have some kind of ticket raised whenever a backup fails. Most backup software will integrate with your ticketing or case management vendor system of choice. There's a lot of really great AI components that a lot of vendors have brought into play in the backup space that will automatically look for why your backup failed or automatically try to kick it off again, and is really important. How about a backup to a different platform like Linux-based storage? Is it better to avoid ransomware? Nothing is going to avoid ransomware because the threat actors have Linux-based ransomware, they have VMware-based ransomware, they have Windows-based ransomware, and they have playbooks that basically say how to get into the backup environments and delete the backups. So your best play here is immutability. And there are some vendors out there that will say, hey, use a Linux server to store your backups, and we have a way to make it immutable for you. That's a really good thing to try. But just going to Linux isn't necessarily going to keep you safe unless you have that immutability component either in your Linux-based backup or some other backup. They're going after everything. And here's an interesting fact. And this is, I guess, I would say personally that probably VMware is more prevalent than Linux. Just because so many people are using the hypervisor VMware. But the ransomware that they've developed is Linux/VMware ransomware, right? So the same ransomware that they use for Linux, they'll use for VMware because VMware has like a Linux-like interface in the command line, right? So it's like some of the same Linux commands you would use on a Linux machine. It's not actually Linux. It's just a management interface. So it's the same piece of ransomware that would attack VMware, that would attack Linux. And believe me, they are going crazy after going after VMware environments. So unfortunately, nothing is really safe from ransomware. It kind of depends who gets in there and what their skill set is. And then we have the whole ransomware as a service thing, right? Where the threat actors just need to get into an environment and then they have access to all these different ransomware that they deploy. And then the ransomware organization takes over for the negotiation, stuff like that. So the barrier to entry for ransomware is super, super low, actually. All right, so we talked about where we're going to recover, talked about recovery objectives. And then we have to actually be ready to recover. And we started talking about this a little bit. We need to test our backup recovery processes and speeds regularly. We need to test at an individual application level. And then we also need to kind of do larger scale testing as well, wider scale testing as well. Because again, application A, B, and C, we might be able to recover them no problem. But when we add application A, B, and C at the same time or add application D, things might break. So it's important to also try to do real world disaster recovery tests so that we can actually say, hey, what breaks? And like I said, I've done a lot of disaster recovery in my career, and a lot of it has been like, oh, we need to do a disaster recovery test or we're going to be out of compliance. So how do we please the auditors? And the way you please the auditors and the way you recover from an actual disaster can be two completely different things, right? So we need to be doing real world tests that will kind of help us with what we need. This also gives us the ability to kind of fix what doesn't work. So, hey, this broke, let's fix it before we actually have a disaster. So if I can't recover in time, what changes do I need to make to my environment before I actually break something, right? Or it doesn't work. So we want that to work. So do a DR test and be ready to fail the first couple times and use that data to fix what doesn't work so you can recover successfully later. Automation is great for these. A lot of the vendors that we're talking about today have solutions that will help you automate this testing and recovery process so that you can get a handle on what will work and what won't work before disaster actually strikes. And then have as many copies of your data as you need to meet your recovery objectives. I don't know, could it be more than 3 in some cases? I think it might, right? So if I have perhaps my production copy, and then I have second site copy, and then maybe I have copies in 2 different clouds because I really want to hedge my bets. That would be 4 copies. That's up to kind of business requirements and how that works out. But I have seen people kind of with multi-cloud recovery strategies. Like, what cloud am I going to go to recover with? I don't know. I'm going to decide the day of because I have everything staged there ahead of time. Is tape a viable option for offline backup? Yeah, it absolutely is. A lot of people kind of don't like tape for whatever reason, but it still is a very valid solution out there that most of these enterprise backup vendors will support. So yeah, tape is a great option for an offline backup. Are AWS snapshots an appropriate backup solution? That's a great question. And I come from the school of a snapshot is not a backup. So I'm going to go no. People might want to argue with me, but unless you are actually taking that data and moving it someplace off of where it was created, to me, that's not a backup, right? That's just a snapshot, and they are different. Not to say that there aren't backup solutions that will leverage snapshots, but no, you really need to have a second copy of that data someplace else for it to be a true backup. And then what about RPOs? If you have recovery points every 30 minutes, what solutions are in place to recover if ransomware has been in an environment for days or weeks? That's a great question. A lot of vendors actually build in scanning during the recovery process. So you can actually scan, first of all, you can scan your backups for ransomware and see how long it's been in if you don't already know. Because remember, the good thing about once you have a ransomware attack is you know what you're looking for, right? So if I know that I have Black Hat ransomware in my environment, I can go scan everything for Black Hat to see how far back it's been and all that kind of stuff. But this does tie into the wider incident response process. Now, that being said, like I said, a lot of vendors actually have scanning built into the recovery process where they can scan to see if the ransomware is there and remediate it as part of the process. And I've also seen a lot of kind of quarantine environment recoveries where, depending on what you're working with, because we can say everything we want about planning for a ransomware attack, but the truth of the matter is until the disaster kind of strikes, we don't know exactly what we're dealing with. So things might change day of, but I've seen a lot of organizations where they have an incident response firm come in, kind of build a quarantine environment and just restore the quarantine environment and then use AV scanning tools at that point. And when I say quarantine, I mean like a completely isolated environment that it couldn't get back out if the ransomware was in there. So sometimes they'll recover and then scan for ransomware before they let it out to production. So it really depends on how the recovery incident response process is happening, but it depends on what products you're using and then kind of what the overall strategy is, right? Because we're sitting here talking about backup, but as backup architects, administrators, what have you, we need to be talking to our security teams as well so we can tie into the wider incident response process. Because, ransomware doesn't hit and then we automatically start recovering, right? That doesn't really happen. If there's a ransomware attack, us as the people who are doing the recovery, right, we're going to wait until we get guidance from incident response, whether that's our internal incident responders or we've hired an incident response firm, which a lot of organizations do. We're going to wait till they tell us more information and how to recover. Because they might say, hey, use that second site, bring everything online there, it's good. Or no, the second site's been compromised, we need to go to the cloud, right? So until kind of they've gotten in there and done some basics of incident response, we might not be immediately recovering. We might need to wait until we've gotten the all clear and we know more about the attack to recover. Especially if the threat actor is still in the environment, right? That's a big determination that has to be made. If these people are still in the environment and we start recovering stuff, guess what? They're just going to go after what we recovered. So everything we're talking today is going to tie into the wider incident response kind of program if we're talking about a cyber event happening, which, again, we don't know how it will unfold until it unfolds, unfortunately. So let's revisit the 3-2-1 backup rule one more time. 3 copies of data. So remember, 1 copy is a production copy. So I don't really count that one. So we're talking about 2 copies of data. That's definitely a good idea, but we might need more based on what our recovery strategy is. Like we might say, hey, we're going to recover to AWS or Azure, but we're not sure which one yet because, well, if there's some big widespread event, we want to make sure we're hedging our bets that, one of these clouds doesn't get completely hammered with everybody going and deploying everything at once. So we want to be in 2 clouds, right? 2 different media/store devices. I'm happy if we look at this as 2 different media devices, or even just 2 different storage devices, however we want to slice it. This is usually pretty easy to accomplish because we're not usually using our production storage as backup storage because it's just really expensive to do that. So we're usually kind of going along with that, right? So that's pretty easy. 1 offsite, yeah, at least 1 offsite. And then here is where we kind of start adding stuff. So somebody threw in the comments a 3-2-1-1-0 rule, which is 3 copies of data, 2 different media, 1 offsite, 1 offline, and then offline immutable or air gapped works too, and 0 errors after automated recovery testing, right? And the big thing there is automated recovery testing I like to put in there because we don't want to be testing backups every single day. That's really what it boils down to. And then it becomes kind of a business decision, right? Like, am I actually going to go through with this 3-2-1-1-0 rule? I hope everybody will. And it really kind of comes down to how quickly can we put this in if we haven't actually done it before, because the issue can often be that we've realized that we have a major event on our hands and that we don't know what's going to happen. And when that happens, we're in trouble. So now's the time to go and kind of retrofit everything and be ready for an event, right? And that's hard to start with. So if I had to start in one place, if we're talking about how to get ready for ransomware or an attack, I get everything backed up to a base level of protection. Then I start looking at my RPOs and RTOs. And then we kind of go from there. But I would definitely get an immutable copy of our data as quickly as possible. Now, someone else has mentioned that there is also the 4-3-2 data backup rule. And for anybody who doesn't know that, the 4-3-2 rule is not something that I've encountered as much as a 3-2-1-1-0 rule. It just means 4 copies of data, 3 locations, 2 offsite. That kind of fits the bill too. Again, it really, really depends, but I think we can get away with the 3-2-1-1-0 rule as well, as long as we're following business requirements. Can we talk about what air gapped is? Yeah, air gap just means that there's no connectivity, right? So it's in an air gap that I'm only going to turn on the connectivity when I need to write to it or something like that. I'm not just going to leave it on and exposed to the network all the time. So it's literally like, think of almost like, I guess I think of an airlock in a spaceship, right? So like you go into the airlock and you have to release the pressure and all that kind of stuff. So it's like I would have this box there. I would have connectivity into the box to write the backups, and then I would kill the connectivity when I don't need it. I'm not going to leave it on all the time. Air gapping can be interesting from an operational perspective. It's not like you can like go out and buy an air gap. It's more like, oh, I'm going to have an automated system disconnect the switch ports and stuff like that. Or if I'm really paranoid, I'm going to go disconnect the switch cords. We can probably get away with immutability pretty well as well. Is there solutions backing up the vendor backups? What do you mean by that, Jeffrey? Like what happens if my backup system fails and my backup system's encrypted, that kind of thing? Because I've seen that happen, actually. I had that happen to myself, actually. So let me tell a quick story because I know we're getting a little on time. I had my backup server ransomwared in the cloud in one of my labs. It wasn't production. And I actually had a second backup server, and my backups were immutable. So all I did was connect my immutable backups to the other backup server, and off I went and started recovering. So that's something that a lot of people actually plan for. Like, what if my backup environment is compromised? A lot of people will have an environment that's turned off and just needs to be turned on, and then everything reconnected to it as well. So I wouldn't say that you back up the vendor backups, but there's definitely a disaster recovery plan for the backup systems, right? To make sure that they're always going to be available. Okay, so in a small IT organization where staff is limited that doesn't have any information security staff, who is responsibility of taking backups and recovering backups to be assigned? I can't answer that question. I've seen a lot of things in smaller organizations where it is that it's like the Windows team will do it, like if it's a Windows environment or something like that, but that's not really something we can answer too easily. It all depends on the organization, but someone's got to do it, right? If you're not going to hire dedicated backup personnel, someone's going to have to take those backups and recover everything, and they're going to have to be trained on that. Okay, so couple more questions. Adam, I'm kind of with you on this, right? So this is going to depend. Air gap backups are disconnected that require physical reconnectivity to cover them. This can mean longer recovery times. Backup storage is supposedly protected, and I have seen it pretty well protected. But I'm not sure if I completely trust them yet. Even if the data is encrypted, it can be accessed by bad actors, then it can be exfiltrated. And then what do we do? Yeah, we're not actually talking about exfiltration today, Adam, because backup vendors cannot solve exfiltration. No one can. I have seen people take the backups. I have seen people take the VMDK files. I have seen people take all sorts of stuff from environments. I would say if you are still hesitant about immutability, kick the tires yourself and take a good look at it, and like talk to your current backup vendor and ask them for case studies and customer references, because it is pretty good. And it's, if you've got nothing today, it can be a very quick kind of quick thing to start going with. Okay. A couple more questions. I think we're starting. We got a little more time. Many small business insurance has cyber insurance included. If there isn't a dedicated team for incident response, the insurance company could be the first call. Yeah, that's a really good point. And a lot of cyber insurance insurance companies will make you have like IR on call as part of the policy, or will include it in the policy. And I think that's been a really good adaptation. And then let's say, what about really small organizations, 0 to 5 employees, no IT, no LAN? I guess in that case, have a copy of your data on a hard drive that you back up every day and like unplug it after you've backed it up. And then I would say use something like a Dropbox or something like that for another copy of your data. And that would give you a couple of additional copies, and that should be pretty good. And then what are the main points of choosing a DR and backup vendor? Oh, we could talk about this forever. It's going to come down to what you need to do in your environment, the kind of OSs, the clouds you're looking to, the recovery objectives you want to do. And I hate to say this, but a lot of times it's going to come down to cost, right? Because you're going to have whatever budget you have, and that's it. Now, the rise of ransomware and the ransomware threat is actually a really good way to kind of get more budget if you need it. So that is one potential way to go. Another question isn't most ransomware a more immediate threat rather than a persistent type? And 2, wouldn't the redundant backups help mitigate ransomware of either kind? Nothing's going to help you prevent it against exfiltration. Well, okay, there's solutions that will help you prevent against exfiltration. There's things you can do, but nothing that we're talking today in the context of backup is necessarily going to help with exfiltration. So how about the support or IR response team? How do we get those? A lot of times people will contract those out and just have a firm on call. And basically you pick up the bat phone and say, hey, something's going on. And they either send a team or remote people in immediately to help you kind of work things out. Okay, backups corrupted. Well, you should be regularly testing your backups so you would know if they're corrupted. The chances of, if you're testing your backups every day and the day ransomware strikes, it's corrupted, probably pretty low. And then you would unfortunately need to probably blow your RPO a little bit and might need to go back a little further in time. But that's why we say we want to be testing everything on a regular basis, because if it's corrupted, we need to figure that out immediately so we can remediate it. So that was a lot of questions. Thank you all so much for them. And then we have one more really exciting thing to do here. We have our prize drawing, a $250 Amazon gift card. So the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Daryl Iser from Vermont. Congratulations to Daryl. We'll be in touch with your card. I just want to say thank you again so much for attending, and thank you again from the Actual Tech Media team for joining us today. I hope everybody has a wonderful day.